Okay. So everybody can see, I believe we should be good to start. Okay.
We can see it, Tanya. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Just need to hide the participants. There we go. Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this year's information session on the Off-Site Levy Bylaw update. My name is Tanya Hines. I'm the supervisor of long-term engineering, and I'm the person who completes the annual update. Today's session is being recorded and will be made public record. The session recording will be shared with council members as well. So I'd like to introduce some of the other city staff in the meeting today. So we have Donnie George. She's our director of engineering. We have Dean Schick. He's our manager of transportation. Regan Lefebvre. He's our senior manager of utilities. And I believe Diane Enger, our acting deputy CAO, has joined us. And I saw a few members of council here today. So for today's presentation, we're going to review the functionality of St. Albert's Off-Site Levy model. We're going to talk about how staging and historical expenditures impact the rate calculations. And we're going to then move on to the actual changes and projects that impacted the 2022 update, plans for this year, and close the presentation with some questions and answers. It's a fairly long presentation, so bear with me. Okay, so there are a few basic principles that guide the collection of offsite levies. First, council has to pass a bylaw for collecting the offsite levies. The levies currently included in the city's bylaw are for sanitary, stormwater, water, and transportation projects. The collected levies are used to pay for all or part of the capital cost of offsite levy facilities or the land required for any of those projects. We use stakeholder consultation and long-term planning documents such as the city's utility and transportation master plans to help determine offsite projects and costs. Offsite levies are allocated based on the principle of benefiting parties, and rates are determined on a proportionate share of each project. There are a number of factors which impact offsite levy rates. These include construction and land costs, the amount of net development area available, timing of development, interest rates, the number of front-ending projects being considered, and finally, the number of projects needed to support growth and development. Under the city's offsite levy bylaw, the offsite levy projects and rates must be reviewed no less than every third year. However, the offsite levy model and rates are updated annually, and that's so we can prepare the offsite levy annual report that's presented to council. This annual report details what infrastructure has been constructed, its costs, estimated construction costs for the projects still to be built, front-ending party payments, the amounts of offsite levies collected, and the amounts of any offsite levy reserves. And last year, we updated the bylaw in March and August. The city's offsite levy bylaw states that all undeveloped lands are subject to offsite levy regardless of whether it is to be developed for commercial, industrial, institutional, community, or residential uses. So during the bylaw's development, it was decided that a flat rate for intensity would be applied to all developable lands, with the exception of lands to be dedicated for arterial roads, environmental reserve, and municipal reserve. And at the request of the development community, the city also removed the lands to be dedicated as stormwater PULs, and those are wet ponds. So when project costs are first established, the city relies on the estimates provided in the UMP and the TMP. Over time, as newer, more detailed project information is obtained, those costs are refined. So the cost calculation does include 15% for contingency, 15% for engineering, and we estimate land costs to be $300,000 per hectare. The city committed to completing a review of project estimates in 2021, and that was to ensure the best available information was included in the model. So the water and transportation projects have been completed, and some sanitary and storm projects were also updated in August of 2021. But we're currently waiting for the UMPs for the sanitary and storm to be completed, so we'll probably see some additional project updates in the 2023 update. So some of the highlights of the 2022 update are the new rates provide an update for the realized construction costs that we saw in 2021. They include some updated project cost estimates based on some pre-design and design work. We estimate that reserve balance will earn an interest at 0.9%. So this is based on St. Albert's short-term average rate of return. And this continues to be lower than an average year, but it's consistent with what we have been seeing since the pandemic started. We also anticipate that the reserve shortfall will be charged interest at approximately 3.48%. And this is based on the loans to local authorities 20-year debenture rate. And the city is seeing increases in the interest rate. It is being charged for debentures, so this will impact our borrowing abilities and project costs when the city is the front-ending party. So with this year's update, we found that the number of offsite levy reference areas has increased from 42 to 83. That's because this year's bylaw includes lands that were annexed from Sturgeon County as of January 1st, 2022. And you will notice that if you're looking at the model or any of the tables, that not all of the offsite levy reference areas are sequential. This is the result of not all the lands that were considered for annexation being included in the final annexation application and subsequent approval. So additionally, some other offsite levy reference areas needed to be divided to accommodate differences in servicing bases. Okay, so when we calculate remaining net development area, the model only considers lands that have yet to be developed within the city boundary and haven't previously paid offsite levies. So the remaining net development area is reflective of what is in the new model. The estimated time frame for lands to be developed in the newly annexed lands was derived from conceptually delineated areas shown in maps that were utilized in the offsite levy review component of the annexation analysis. So it is anticipated that these figures will be further refined over time as land use planning progresses and we become more detailed and becomes more detailed within those annexed areas. One thing you might notice when you're trying to add up things is they don't always equal 100, and that can be attributed to rounding and formulas contained in the offsite levy model. So all remaining net development area is assigned a projected year of development in the offsite levy model. Planning assists in providing this estimate, which is updated annually. What they do is they look at what approved subdivisions executed development agreements that year, and then consider when they expect other approved subdivisions to start construction. They consider redistricting applications, which may be in process or recently approved. They will also look at whether an area is in part of an approved area structure plan, or if there's a pending ASP application coming forward. And finally, they look at the long-term planning growth scenarios to best predict when and where development will occur. So we do recognize that the accuracy of estimation for timing of development deteriorates as the process can take on a bit of a, I guess, best guess scenario the further into the future you look. So that's why it's really important that we look at these numbers annually to update them with new data as it's obtained. And the 25-year development timeframe focuses developers' costs today more so on the infrastructure that benefits development today and less so on infrastructure that will be built in the future. So in addition to considering what lands will be developed and when, staging will also factor in when infrastructure is going to be built. So the current offsite levy rates, so the rates that are calculated before the staging adjustment is applied, assume all of the offsite levy infrastructure projects will be built immediately, all the lands will be developed immediately, and therefore all the required offsite levies required to pay for this infrastructure will be collected immediately. Obviously, that's not how development actually occurs. So what staging does is it will divide the cost of a project by 25 years, and then it calculates an annual project cost. The model then includes a pro rata amount in current rates based on the project planned year of construction. So for example, if our 25-year time frame is from 2022 to 2046, and we have a project plan to be constructed in 2040, the calculator would actually include 7 years worth of the cost for that project in today's rates. So as the development timeframe extends out further in subsequent years, the amount included in the rates changes and more project costs are gradually entered into the rates. And if a project is constructed, all of the costs are included in the rates regardless of when the land is developed. So the offsite levy model does contain a staging adjustment. And so what this does is it adjusts the offsite levy rates by taking into account inflation, when projects will be constructed, when levies will be collected, and interest impacts on reserve accounts. So at times offsite levy reserves won't be sufficient to fund the project construction. So during these times, front ending will be required. And when the reserve balance is in a positive position, it will earn interest. And when the reserve balance is negative, so that's when we've had to front end projects, the reserve balance is charged interest. So the reserve balance represents a point in time in each of the offsite levy infrastructure categories, and it's recalculated annually. So the forecasted levy account balances will net zero. So the staging cost adjustment will determine how much the rates have to be adjusted to deal with the impacts of staging, so that at the end of the 25-year development timeframe, the reserve balances are at zero. So sometimes that staging adjustment will result in levies increasing in some categories and decreasing in others. So using that 25-year development timeframe may cause some rates to fluctuate, as it is influenced by the timing of construction and the introduction of more annual costs the closer a project comes to being constructed, and how many projects have project costs outside the current 25-year development timeframe. So using a 25-year development timeframe for calculating levies does increase risk to the city, as the model is underfunded until all lands are developed and project costs are collected. This risk can be mitigated by continuing to update the model annually and by not approving any construction of projects that aren't within that 25-year development timeframe, unless the off-site levy bylaw is updated to include those project costs within the levy rate calculation. So prior to annexation approval, though, there were several projects that had portions of their project costs, and those were allocated to something called other stakeholder share. So those lands were outside the city boundary, and those costs were not included in the offsite levy. And there was a risk that the city would not be able to collect all of the funds required to pay for a project. So with annexation complete, those lands and costs are now incorporated into the offsite levy calculation. So what it means is historical project expenditures that were previously assigned to other stakeholder share have been updated, and they've been moved to the offsite levy share. So this did impact reserve account calculations and influence rates this year. So the water and transportation basins are single service basins. So what that means is there's a single rate for everybody. The sanitary and storm basins are project specific servicing basins. And so you will see that people will have different rates for those depending on what projects they're benefiting from. Okay, there were some changes made to the sanitary infrastructure category for 2022. So as a result of some project design work undertaken in the north part of the city, we're making changes to 2 projects. So project 2 is having the sanitary lift station removed, and it's being combined with project 3 to utilize a section of gravity trunk and a siphon. So the estimated project cost has been updated to reflect the opinion of probable cost determined during preliminary design work, and the project's been renamed the Northeast Gravity Trunk and Siphon. Project 3 has been removed as it was combined with project 2. It's important to note that any unspent offsite levies collected for this project, so project 3, are left in the model as a credit, which it's applied to offsite levy areas that were to benefit from this project. So the credit is applied against other sanitary projects within those areas to which they contributed. So project costs which were previously assigned to lands outside the city are now included in the offsite levy rate. And project 8, which is on the west side of Ray Gibbon Drive, has some estimated construction costs still associated with it, as that project costs haven't been finalized. So all of these factors influence the moderate increase in sanitary offsite levy rates. We also, as a utility master plan is completed for the lands within the newly annexed areas, it's anticipated that we will have some additional sanitary projects added to the offsite levy model. And the city is currently working on a review of its sanitary utility master plan for lands within the city boundary or the previous city boundary, but no changes to the projects have been made yet. Okay, so currently we have $74.6 million remaining to be collected for sanitary offsite levies. And of that, there's 72.6 is within the current 25-year development timeframe. For 2022, the overall project costs are about $4 million less than last year, but 28.4 million of that has been removed from other stakeholder share and is now part of the offsite levy program. So we had few changes made to the stormwater infrastructure for this year. Project costs which were previously assigned to lands outside the city are now included as an offsite levy cost. And this did influence the increases in stormwater offsite levy rates. So what I mean by that is when I say we had other stakeholders share amount, the stormwater reserve is actually a really good example. So the reserve thought we had a positive balance of almost $930,000. So, but when the costs were added in, by the start of 2021, that reserve actually had a negative balance of $401,000. So this is actually a more accurate picture of where the reserves were really at, as we had reimbursed the front-ending parties for all of the work completed where we could, even if the model didn't track it as a cost to be included in the off-site levy calculation. So for somebody who is like me and likes my checkbook to add up to the penny, this is a good update for the model. So the model calculation goes back into those historical numbers and it will recalculate the reserve balance each year, and it corrects when it previously applied an interest earned calculation and replaces it with an interest charged amount. And as I mentioned with the sanitary projects, we're also updating our storm utility master plan, and it's anticipated that we'll have some additional projects possibly after that's completed. Other project we're working on is the Carrot Creek Master Drainage Plan, and we're looking to get that finalized and submitted to the provincial government for approval. And we anticipate there might be some changes to existing stormwater projects next year. So currently we have $75.7 million remaining to be collected for stormwater offsite levies. And of that, $42.6 million is within the current 25-year development timeframe. So for 2022, the overall project costs are approximately $5 million less from March of last year, but $40.8 million has been removed from the other stakeholder share and is part of the offsite levy program now. For water, we've had several changes to the infrastructure category for 2022. So as a result of an update to the water utility master plan, it was determined there were projects that could be eliminated, relocated, or split into smaller stages. So the Water UMP has proposed a better plan to support growth than what was planned previously. So by consolidating our new reservoir infrastructure in the north, closer to where growth is occurring, it allows the city to better leverage its existing water supply infrastructure, and it reduces the transmission infrastructure that is needed to support growth. And all of these factors influence the substantial decrease in water offsite levy rates. So the following projects were either eliminated or renamed and relocated as their function remained the same. So project 1, the Southwest Reservoir, was eliminated. Project 7, 8, 11, and 12 were all renamed. So as I just showed, the South Reservoir has been eliminated. So because the offsite levy rates were collecting levies for both the South and North Reservoirs, any levies collected to date for the South Reservoir were allocated to the North Reservoir, as it will be the next reservoir, the next reservoir constructed. So I worked with Corvus directly on that to make sure I did it correctly. I want to point out that neither reservoir was collecting the entire cost of the projects. So as both projects had an allocation of cost attributed to that other stakeholder share. We had some other changes made to reservoirs. So project 2 was originally planned to be about 61,000 cubic meters. So its size and cost estimate were adjusted as the expansion project of the reservoir is becoming a new project to keep construction costs separate due to the length of time between the expansion and when it's going to be required. So the UMP also identified an additional reservoir required in the northwest area of the city. So what was originally anticipated to be 1 large reservoir will become 3 projects in 2 reservoir locations. And project 17, which is the Sturgeon Reservoir, is a new project. So the design and rebuild of the Sturgeon Reservoir will result in an additional 1,000 cubic meters of storage capacity. So as this storage can be used to delay the construction of the North Reservoir for a short time, and it's being used to support new growth, this portion of the project is being allocated to the offsite levy program. So currently we have $85.4 million remaining to be collected for water offsite levies. And of that, 25.7 million is within the current 25-year development timeframe. So for 2022, the overall costs are about $24.7 million less than last year, and 37.7 million has been removed from the other stakeholder share and is part of the offsite levy program now. So there were several changes made to the transportation infrastructure category for 2022, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. So the 2022 offsite levy bylaw includes the addition of 5 new connector roadways. 1 existing project had project costs reassociated with it. The cost estimates for several projects were updated, and the project costs which were previously assigned to lands outside the pre-2022 city boundary are now included as an offsite levy cost. And all of these costs influence the substantial increase in road offsite levy rates. So this year's update proposes to add 5 new connector roadway projects. I just want to point out that although 3 of the projects don't have any current estimated project costs assigned to them, as we need to work out more of the project details. And the 2 projects with costs and allocations assigned to them are Villeneuve Road, and that's the side from St. Albert Trail to sort of Hogan Road, and the Range Road 260. So project 10, which is Meadowview Drive, has project costs reassociated with it, as portions of this road are expected to be upgraded and expanded to support development. So cost estimates for several projects were updated based on utilizing roundabouts as the preferred intersection control, and to reflect the updated construction costs that we have seen increasing over the last few years. And project costs which were previously assigned to lands outside the city boundary are now included as an offsite levy cost. So this is just a table I provided that shows the projects that changed and how they changed. It is interesting to note that last year's transportation levy was similar to the levy that was in effect in 2015. And in 2015, the rates included projects 10 and 11, which had their costs removed from the model in 2016. But project 11 was brought back into the levy last year, and project 10 is being added back this year. So cost estimates for several projects were also updated based on updated reports and adding costs for the roundabouts that are reflective of what they're actually costing to be built. And construction costs were also updated to reflect those construction costs that have been increasing. So all road projects, whether they have been city-led or developer-led, seem to be experiencing higher construction costs than submitted estimates. So I want to break down the costs that have resulted in the off-site levy transportation increase. So 26.5 million can be attributed to the new crosstown roads, and this amount does not include the portions of the project's costs that are allocated to the city. We saw a $54.1 million increase, and that's for project cost updates. This amount also includes if a project has had increases in its actual construction costs and if a new debenture has been taken out. So if it does, the cost of the debenture interest is now included in the total project cost. We saw almost $4 million from other stakeholder shares added. Those costs are from the Venice Road upgrades. And $12.6 million is an increase to the amount of project costs allocated to lands currently outside the 25-year development timeframe. These costs are not included in the current offsite levy project calculation, I should say. So currently we have $240.5 million remaining to be collected for transportation projects. Of that, $212 million is within the current 25-year development timeframe. So for 2022, the overall project costs are increasing by $102 million more than last year. And then we also had that $4 million removed from their stakeholder share, and that's part of the offsite levy program now. So when we talk about combined offsite levies for sanitary, stormwater, and transportation, you're going to see they're different for every property, and that depends on the sanitary and storm basins. So we saw this year was that a combined offsite levy for all properties saw an increase between almost $11,000 to $61,000 per hectare. And I didn't bother providing any averages because they really don't provide any kind of accurate information. And that's just due to the different benefiting areas and the number of projects they contribute to. What we did see was that the largest increases are in areas where previous project costs were allocated to other stakeholder share. And that's because those project expenditures were adjusted this year to allocate the cost to the off-site levy share, which also influenced the reserve balance calculations. And the project costs are now allocated to land that is expected to develop within 25 years. So the overall offsite levy program is now valued at just over $700 million. And so to date, developers in the city have constructed about $216 million worth of that infrastructure. So I think it's just really important to recognize the commitment we're making together to support growth and development in the city. And we all know that last year was a busy year for development. So as of December 31st, 2021, we had front-ending parties waiting to be reimbursed for almost $54 million. And in March, we anticipate being able to reimburse parties almost $8 million, and that'll be in accordance with council policy. And that will leave about $46 million in front-ending costs still to be paid out. So for 2022, we plan to monitor construction costs, especially with regards to road and roundabout construction. We have areas where both the city and developers will be installing this infrastructure. So if we see costs coming in lower next year than we will be able to adjust cost estimates for roundabouts in the 2023 update. The request to council, which is asking them to authorize a pilot program for allowing up to 30 days after a DA is executed for developers to pay their offsite levies, is being presented with the Off-Site Levy bylaw on March 21st. And for the Off-Site Levy working group, we're looking to get started on developing the crosstown contribution formula for those projects. And finally, the city is looking to finalize the Carrot Creek Master Drainage Plan with our other municipal partners and to submit the plan to the province for approval and adoption. And based on the final plan, we may see changes to the existing storm projects introduced in 2023. I do want to thank you for taking the time to come out to our annual presentation. If you have any questions or concerns about this year's update, please submit those to me in writing by March 24th. We're going to open up the discussion for any questions you have. I did want to just let everyone know that I know this is a lot of information, and as always, I will be sending out a copy of this presentation and a bunch of other supporting documentations to everybody after the meeting so that you have time to go through them at your own pace. And then if you have questions, you can follow up with me. I just also wanted to mention that next week, I'm going to be off Monday and Tuesday, and then I'm on course Wednesday to Friday. So I will have limited access to my email, but I will be checking in and I will get back to you. Okay, so I'm just going to end the slideshow and stop sharing, and then we'll open up for questions. Okay. I know there's a lot of information.
Tanya, you may want a correction there. I think you mentioned March 24th for all the questions to come to you. I think it was March 7th, 4th. Okay.
March 4th, sorry. So do we have any questions by anybody?
Sorry, this is Sue from Melcor. Surprisingly, okay. I have a couple of questions. I just wanted to start by saying thanks, Tanya. That was super informative and detailed and well organized. And I also wanted to say that I think there's a couple of counselors on here. I was a few minutes late checking in, so I don't know if I missed any introductions, but I see a few names and I am super happy to see that because I think this is a really important topic, and it's one that is often sort of, I don't know if misunderstood is the right way, but there's you know, you were teaching us a lot today and it's a lot to take in. So thank you to the people on council who have made it here today. And I think I know the answer to this question, but since there are a few people on council, I just wanted this to be, I guess, like on record. I recently, a few months ago, actually had a meeting with the mayor and a couple of councilors. Councillor Killick was there as well. And it was discussed at that time, and Kathy Heron sort of assured me that St. Albert Trail is not a levy project and that it is a capital project. And I believe that's wrong, but I wanted to just hear it for certain that it is fully being funded by levies?
It is an off-site levy project. It is not being fully funded by levies. Any of the work that is related to RMR, so paving of existing roads, like if we were repaving what was already there, those costs are not being allocated back to the model. Things like that, costs such as moving the commerce sign, not included, things like that. So we are tracking those costs and trying to keep, but it is an off-site levy project, absolutely.
Okay, and so maybe just to add to that, and just to share that in that conversation, she also confirmed that it was a design for a gold-plated highway. And so my comment overall is that what I'd like to see, and I know we're working on this together in the steering committee, is that it's the city's prerogative if they want to build sort of gold-plated facilities, but when it is an off-site levy project, it really needs to be broken down of what is required to meet the functionality and then what is on top of it. So if it's an extra beautiful lift station, that's okay, but that shouldn't be in the off-site levy. And so with the city upfronting a lot of projects, I think it's super, super important that those things are broken down sort of as a taxpayer and a developer, that there needs to be a clear breakdown of what is a want and what is a need, and only the needs should be in the levy. I have one other question just about roundabouts. And I know you said you're kind of monitoring the costs this year so that you can like reflect them as they change for future, I guess, for the rate in the future. But is there any consideration to delay some of the construction that you have planned with the costs coming in so much higher than anticipated? Just curious if the timing is super critical on all of those, or if there is a consideration to wait.
I'm going to let Dean speak to that, but some of those projects are going to be put in by developers. So that would be a question of whether you guys want to proceed with your own programs or not, but I'm going to let Dean speak to the city's program.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing in the most recent, with last year and this year's forecasted construction costs, it's not a case where the network as provided in the offsite levy model is being constructed in 2022 or 2023. So those costs are associated with construction projects directly relevant and being completed in 2022 and 2023. And, even the 2023 and future costs will be evaluated for what is kind of the anticipated and where we're seeing the inflation or the increase. We won't necessarily project for the outstanding of the time, but we'll take everything into account in consideration. And this is the benefit of, as Tanya said, of doing the annual updates and the reviews and incorporating the trending of the construction costs versus just using a knee-jerk reaction of annual costs, if you will.
Did you have another question? Oh, no, see your hand is back down.
No, yeah,
Sorry.
that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any questions from anyone else? I guess everybody wants to get their information packet and so they can sit down and comb through it. And again, like I said, I am in the office today, tomorrow. I just took Monday and Tuesday off. A big exam coming up next week. So if you don't,
Tanya.
Yes, sir.
Councillor Killick here. I just wanted to follow up on Sue's question a little bit on, and maybe it's a question for Dean, but just generically, are roundabouts more expensive or less expensive than signalized? And when we compare those two, and I agree with our strategy around roundabouts for a more efficient way to move traffic. So I'm not questioning that, but if I compare roundabout to signalized, is one more expensive than the other? Then on top of that, we're seeing an inflation of construction costs from original estimate. Is it kind of a two compounding factors there?
Yeah, absolutely. The initial investment to a roundabout is higher than like say an average 4-legged signalized intersection. Over time, in terms of the maintenance and operational costs, it's less. But however, those initial costs are slightly higher. They're subject now to some of the design improvements that we're seeing in some roundabout opportunities and some design changes. There's opportunities to try and minimize that. And, it's kind of subject to where if you're looking at an arterial to arterial roundabout, like a multi-lane or a single lane, that will ultimately kind of increase that variance of what you may see from a 4-legged typical intersection to a roundabout as well in the percent difference. But yeah, there are just really blunt, there is a higher cost of constructing a roundabout in the initial construction costs compared to a typical intersection.
I think too, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dean, but does not using a roundabout also let us use, I guess, less linear? So we need less roads when we have roundabouts because we don't need as much storage capacity.
Yeah, that is one of the benefits of the offsets. And I'll use an example of Hogan Road, where there's opportunity here where in an intersection you may need dedicated turning lanes to be accommodated as well, your footprint and whatnot. And that's where some of these, depending on the actual operations and the traffic demands at the intersection, will influence what that cost variance is. And so that's why I very specifically, Councillor Killick, I'm not giving a specific value of the difference because it's really dependent on the intersection and the required lane designations and whatnot. So to really define the actual value of that difference. So yeah, but you may ultimately, by improving the capacity through a roundabout through use of a roundabout, you may not need additional road widening or improvements along other areas or segments of the corridor. So it's something which would offset those costs.
Okay, thank you. And the added benefit of just better traffic flow for residents and ultimately developers as well as an advantage too. Okay, thank you.
Unless you're me and you're not so good at, don't mind a single roundabout. It's those multi-lanes that get me a little bit afraid. Because I grew up in Halifax with the Armdale Rotary.
Me too. I'm still trying to figure them out.
So did we have any other questions?
Tanya, if I may, I will just add one quick comment. With the council strategy over the last 4 years, we've been looking at the total cost of ownership, which speaks to what Dean just spoke about. Although the capital investment may be higher, we're looking at the overall operation maintenance. And we are looking at all infrastructure that we're bringing on to Off-Site Levy through that lens. Not just for roads, for lift stations. I know we recently went through a rigorous design analysis to eliminate a lift station to convert that into a siphon, so which actually reflected with the lesser cost on the Off-Site Levy cost estimate that Tanya has put forward. So that's another lens that we are looking at, all the cost that's going in.
I did see there was a question in the chat. And so the question being asked is, why are newly annexed areas only finding out now that off-site levies will be applied? So I guess this is a bit of a challenging question, and I may look to, I wasn't part of the annexation group, so I'm not sure what kind of information was shared with new people or as part of those applications. I'm not really sure how to answer that question, if I'm just being honest. I can find out from the planning team and get back to you directly to the person who's asking the question. But I guess it's, normally I would assume it was applied. I'm just not sure how that message was presented. So what I will do is, like I said, I will find out for that information and have someone contact you directly. The other part I will say is that maybe if I go back a step and explain what offsite levies are. So when we did our first offsite levy bylaw earlier, that was when we did our first annexation around 2006. I think it was finalized in 07. So what it was determined was that there was a lot of the city and our existing infrastructure couldn't service the lands without extra infrastructure. So the cost of that infrastructure is too expensive for either developers to pay on their own or the city. So what we did is we developed a system. So the off-site levies, and what they do is they divide up that cost between the benefiting parties and the benefiting lands, and everybody shares in paying for that infrastructure to support development. So that's kind of what off-site levies are. They are a cost of development. So if you're living in an annexed area and you're just living in your home and things like that, you're not developing, you're not subject to paying those until such time as you were going to be perhaps changing your project or doing a subdivision, things like that, where you're looking to develop or use your land in a different way. That's when off-site levy payment is triggered. So I will follow up with you directly, but that's a little bit of help. Do you have a follow-up question to that? Or Donnie, if you have anything to add? I'm not really.
Tanya, I'm guessing this is one of those questions that is asked by one, but is of interest to many. And maybe, and I also think if you give an answer to one, they'll probably share it with other members on the call. So maybe to keep it direct, it would be better just to communicate it out to everybody, because I'm sure
Absolutely.
That way everybody gets the same info at the same time.
For sure. No, that's fair.
Tanya.
Yes, sir.
It's Dwayne Lake here. I'm in the annex lands, and off-site levies are new to me, won't lie. So if I heard you correctly, if I'm sitting on 50 acres and it's just sitting there, you don't collect off-site levies from me until that 50 acres sees a development. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, normally, like I said, what offsite levies are is like I said, they're a way to fund development. So depending on when you're coming in, and you don't pay them until you're coming in for development.
Okay, so the lands that we're on are considered, 25 years away kind of thing. So I wouldn't expect to pay anything until 25 years from now. So I could be dead essentially and not worry about it.
Well, I guess I don't want to wish that on you, but I would say that it comes down to timing of development. So when we brought in the annex lands, what I did was I looked at, so obviously when we were doing our analysis, the consultants looked at when they anticipated land coming on to development. And so I used that information to figure out approximately what lands would come on within the 25 years, what are going to be outside that 25 years. But what will happen is, let's say you're in an area and suddenly there's an area structure plan developed for your area and things like that. So that might change because we'll have better information, because right now those 25 years, I'm assuming, are based on like where the servicing is going, where's the land is sort of expanding out. And we don't do leapfrog development, so that's like not jumping over places. So you kind of assume that the city is going to grow out, kind of, just like us over COVID, just expanding a little bit every year, right? So you just kind of every year it would come on. But if we got new information, that might change. But if you're, as a property owner, when things like that, like planning applications, like area structure plans are being developed, you should be part of that process, right? Like you should be getting contacted, whether you're leading that or you're just, an interested stakeholder, you would be involved in those conversations or being provided information about that. So it should never come as a surprise that suddenly your lands were within an area structure plan or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, that makes sense. And so how are they collected? Is an offsite levy collected just on your taxes, or is it a separate bill kind of thing?
It's a separate bill. So typically what happens is you'll go through you'll have, like I said, there's a whole planning process. And so as part of that planning process, you get a subdivision approval. Part of that is you have to get a development agreement. So the development agreement is when, it's complicated to be a developer. You get it. That's when you start doing your detailed engineering design. And that's when you're making your commitment. So it's a development agreement is a contract between the developer and the city. And what you're saying is, you're showing us plans of how you're going to install services to your development and things like that. So what we're doing is agreeing to what is going to be constructed and how it's going to be constructed. And at that time, we have schedules that we determine what off-site levy payments you make, and they're charged in accordance with what's in effect as under the bylaw at that time. And so you're, as before you start development, that's why if you saw one of the earlier slides, we talked about one of the requests that we're taking to council is our development community has asked if they could have a 30-day time lag, which means that they would pay their levies 30 days after they execute their development agreement. So it's all timing. If that makes sense, but yeah, you wouldn't, it's a contract. It's not, you wouldn't get a tax bill for this.
Okay, perfect. No, I'm good. It's just, like I said, it's new to me, so I'm just trying to figure it out.
For
But
sure.
that's a great answer. Thank you very much.
Oh, I see we have another question. Okay, so when it says Tanya's slide suggested a $2 to $3 million price tag for a traffic circle, she says that's about 6 times more than a controlled intersection. In a retrofit scenario where there aren't any road reductions anticipated, what sort of future cost savings are you anticipating in order to offset this premium? I'm going to look to Dean to speak to that.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Dean, I
so-
could have just asked that, but I wanted to type it out while we were talking.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I apologize because I was kind of doing a chameleon and working on multiple things here at once. So I think, I guess the one thing to be upfront is the cost estimates that we're using are the most recent cost estimates, as well as a review of what City of Edmonton has provided us as information in regards to their cost for roundabouts as well. So you know, typically what the nice thing is we're usually working in advance with you guys for your transportation impact assessments and, you know, identifying where these opportunities of roundabout designs may improve the intersection capacity or operations. And so we're hopefully working together and acknowledging the use of these roundabouts well in advance of anyone going forward with construction. In terms of offsetting costs, I don't know necessarily how at this point, because again, it's that initial higher investment ultimately that is shared potentially between the city and development community. But at the same time, then recognizing that later the development community doesn't have to perform updated maintenance and address the life expectancy of a typical signalized or four-legged intersection. So it's the city as partners with the development community investing in roundabouts, which offsets future costs in the long term of that intersection operation. So I really don't know how to say like how in this model, or is there going to be, if you're looking for like how are our partners going to be compensated for the variance in the fronting of costs? Is like,
Yeah, I think that's it. It's just that like a $2 to $3 million price tag is expensive, and we have roundabouts in Jensen, and they are not without maintenance. Let me tell you, like
no.
people drive over them all the time, and they require a lot of upkeep with concrete. And so, you know, I'm just sort of wondering when we're retrofitting these traffic circles into areas where they weren't planned for before, where we're not recognizing any sort of lane reductions or anything like that. You know, is that maybe a hefty price tag to pay for the infrastructure? You know, I could understand maybe if you're planning for them in advance and you can, you know, kind of reduce the road as you indicated for queuing and whatnot. But in sort of a scenario where you're kind of putting it in after the fact, I don't really know if those cost savings will be realized. And it just seems like it's an expensive piece of infrastructure, definitely. So something you and I, you know, we can work on that, and I'm not, doesn't need to be determined right now, but just wanted to bring that up, that it is a significant premium to put in a traffic circle versus a controlled intersection.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the short term, yeah. If you're not anticipating long-term operations, I'm talking short term. So that's just, yeah, we can work through that, but wanted to bring that up.
Sorry, I saw I was on mute. So I think that might be the last of our questions. If it is, I am going to, again, thank everybody for coming today. And if you do have any follow-up questions, I think everybody has my email, and just send me an email. And if it is a question that I think, isn't pertinent to just one person, I will try to include it in a follow-up to everybody else as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording the meeting, and thank everybody for coming out.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.